Glass ceiling still seems to be firmly in place for South African women. A BrandMapp survey has found that women are 30% less likely to be managers of any sort, and they are half as likely to be C-suite executives. The study also found women are underrepresented in the automotive, construction, security and mining sectors. To discuss this further, I'm joined now by BrandMapp Director Brandon Kock. Brandon, good afternoon. Welcome to today. Thanks for joining us. Not a pretty picture. I mean, if you gather by all the kinds of efforts that have been made, either through law, as in the Employment Equity Act, or through initiatives of empowerment or gender parity initiatives by all sorts of organizations, that in 2023 we are still looking at big gaps between women pay and also women's role in the executive space.
Absolutely, Dan. Thanks for having me on. I think you've summed it up absolutely neatly there. It's amazing that after all of this time, especially at the top of the corporate ladder, that we still see such a hole left. There is definitely a gender divide, despite the best efforts of employment equity, etc. So what we're seeing, I think, this is not just from our data, but from the JSE data and stuff like that, you'll see that at the very, very top, the CEO level, I think 5% of all CEOs of listed companies in the JSE are female. So there's been quite a lot of movement made kind of in the middle of the top, but in general, we still remain a very gender divided playing field in South Africa. That's very much what we see in our study.
Yeah, before we try and unpack what could be leading to this, your study, is it done on an annual basis? Just remind us again, Brandon, these current numbers you're sharing with us, that, for example, women are 30% less likely to be managers of any sort. What period do they cover?
So ours is an annual survey. We go into field once a year with BrandMapp, which is it's the country's biggest study of what we call tax-paying South Africa. So it's the 30% of adults who live in households earning 10,000 Rand a month or more. So it's very much the worker, the sort of formally employed workforce of South Africa. That's what we study, and we do it literally once a year. So in a few months' time, we'll be going back into field. But I have to say that these kind of results, we don't see major shifts year on year. It's the kind of thing that, when there's a 2 or 3% shift in the percentage of women who make up the executive workforce, that's a massive shift, given 13 million people that we're talking about.
Yeah, are we stuck in the stereotypes, in gender stereotypical roles? If you say there's not significant moves, every year you've been tracking this, Brandon?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have the words. I don't know if you are familiar with Jordan Peterson, some of the online commentators who talk about gender roles and how difficult it is to break out of the stereotype. But we absolutely see it in South Africa. So, in those more typically historically male-dominated fields, things that are very engineering-focused, things that have to do with things and machines, we see very dominated by men. And the moment you start getting into more human, more people-orientated things like the nursing industry, the health industry, consumer community services, these incredibly vital parts of our society, they are all female-dominated. So we definitely see gender stereotypes playing out, and I think it's one of the things the reasons why the survey is so interesting and important is that if you think something is true, you can look in the data and go, yeah, there are definitely some big skews when it comes to what men and women decide to do with their lives.
Yeah, I hope I don't get into trouble for my next question, but what you're saying is that it looks like in the so-called heavy lifting types of jobs, like construction, engineering, and mining, it's male-dominated, it's reserved, not reserved, but tends to be dominated by us guys. And then in the so-called lightweight kind of roles like HR, like services and stuff, then we find our women. I mean, are you getting a sense of why are we
possibly
stuck,
lightweight is the word. So I think we just need to you might get into trouble for using the word lightweight, Dan. It's not, I know what you're saying. It's heavy lifting versus non-heavy lifting jobs.
Yes, yes, okay. Thank you, Brandon, for saving me there. Are you getting a sense of the reasons why we are not really shifting the dial when it comes to women empowerment in leadership positions across the board?
Yeah, I mean, I think the general sense would be that it's one thing to put rules in place. It's another thing to try and change society completely in terms of how it thinks and what people are led to believe. So I think there's still a lot of ingrained legacy about the traditional roles that men and women are expected to play in South African society. And I'm not sure, some of them are potentially bad things, but I almost think we also, this isn't this is not an attempt to sort of beat us all over the head with a stick and say, you need to do a better job. It's just a gentle reminder, in a way, that although things have changed and although we are a changing society, men and women still have various stereotypical roles, and there's still work to do. So it's almost like it's a scorecard moment and going, we've done a lot of work, but there's still quite a lot of work to do. And I don't think there's anything to blame. I think a lot of the blame comes literally from our history and our legacy as a society of what men and women are supposed to do and the roles they're supposed to play, the sports they're supposed to play, and those kind of things. And we're slowly breaking those down.
Yeah, because from where I stand, I mean, I have interviewed a lot of outstanding, excellent women professionals in different roles in our country, in the work that we do here at eNCA. One would have hoped to see a little bit a better number, but you are quite right. We are on this journey, and women's empowerment remains an important struggle for all of us to support. Gender pay gap-wise, I mean, are you able to tell our viewers, Brendan, how big is that gap?
Yeah, so that's a very interesting one. We can dive into industry by industry. And I think that I think when you start looking at the very top, as I said, the top ladder, the high earning jobs, it looks like that's where the glass ceiling still exists. So in other words, when you look at the percentage of men and women in the executive level, the C-suite level, there are clearly fewer women than men. And that means that at that level of high income, it feels like women don't quite have the same access as we would like them to. But then as you go further down, when you start getting into education, for example, the higher paid jobs in education often are very equal, very egalitarian. So there's no one answer to that. There are some industries, and education is a prime example, where it's almost in your interest to be a female if you want to go for a higher earning job. And there's some like the building industry, or even the high finance industry where it's definitely male dominated. So there's no one answer to that. It changes and shifts depending on the industry that you're talking about.
Yeah, I saw one insurer that's listed last week, Momentum Metropolitan Holdings, announcing its first woman CEO ever in the industry on the JSE. Yeah. So while it looks like there are some moves here and there, we're still far away. Any silver lining, anything that's telling you from the numbers that you see from the study that BrandMapp is doing, Brendan, that says we are really doing the best we can, we are moving in the right direction?
Well, I mean, I think if we look over the last 10 years, those numbers that sounded so horrible when we started, the 30% or the 5% and these things, if you go back 10 years when we started doing BrandMapp and looking at this segment of the market, those numbers were far worse. They were probably half of that. So there's definitely some sense that that's moving on. And I think one of the most positive things is that half of the reason we do this work is to try and help the businesses of South Africa understand how they can do things better, right? And one of the interesting things about gender, it's so obvious. If you're a male skewed product or service or industry, or a female skewed, by definition, you're only appealing to less than 100% of society, right? So the more you can do things that appeal to males and females equally, the more chance you have of success, because you're targeting 100% of the population. And I think that from a business point of view and products point of view, and how people like banks are trying to embrace the consumer out there, that's where a lot of the work is being done to try and flatten out society a little bit more. So if there's a silver lining, I think it's the major corporations of South Africa are definitely starting to take notice of it and do something about it.
Yeah. Do we still have a split of 51% female to 49% male in the country?
We do, Dan. We are formally outnumbered.
Yes, and that should tell us. Yeah, that should tell us something about our approach and stuff like that. And finally, Brendan, is there any other point you'd like to make as we conclude that I may not have asked you? Because this is a very important discussion about making sure that we really open all the doors and break down those ceilings that are preventing women from reaching the heights of leadership in corporate South Africa.
Dan, I think if my parting thought would be, we've just look at what we've just been talking about, what you've been talking about on the show. We have so many incredibly important and heavy things going on in our lives. We have, massive poverty issues. We've got water issues and power issues. We've got so many things to worry about. And I do think that the gender issue and the gender divide lies at the core of our society. And it's almost like in the midst of everything else that's going on, hopefully by doing a little piece of work like this and reminding people that there is still work to be done on a very, very, the core basis of gender in South Africa, it's something we mustn't forget about. And I think that's probably the main reason why we're very thankful for people like you for letting us have a say and remind everyone that it's important, that gender equality should be right at the top. Thanks to
people like you in BrandMapp for doing the survey and study and letting us know what you're finding out. We need to keep that struggle going on. By the way, I'm being directed by a woman this afternoon, Veronica Pewa. We call her Verushka here, Brendan, on air. So she's in my ear all the time, telling me what to do and what to do. So women empowerment is very critical indeed, on a serious note. Thank you very much. BrandMapp Director of Storytelling, Brandon de Kock. The numbers are better than 10 years ago when they started this survey about the role of women in corporate South Africa. Things have improved somewhat since then, but there's still a long way to go. So we need to keep on the struggle for women empowerment and representation and gender parity at the highest echelons of leadership in corporate South Africa and generally in our society. Still ahead on